Hey everyone. Hope everyone's doing good. Hope you all are doing happy, doing blessed, doing safe. And as the recording of this video, I hope you guys had a great summer 2024. So during the summer, I read books. Okay. I don't really game a lot because it gets really hot and all that stuff. But I read books. Okay. And over the summer, I read two books. And we're going to talk about the first of them today. And that is Merc, American Soldiers of Fortune. And it was written by Jay Mallen and Robert K. Brown. Now, I'm going to talk about a few things in this review. First off, I'm going to give you some basic book details, who the authors are, what type of format you can get these books in. Is it in Kindle or just paperback? What type of format? I'm going to tell you about the page numbers, all that stuff. Okay, just basic book details. Then we'll talk about why I chose this book. There is a particular reason why I chose this book because this is kind of outside of what I normally pick. Okay, and normally I pick post-apocalyptic thrillers. Books like Invasion USA, the Patriot series, stuff like that. Okay. But this is a nonfiction book about real life people doing real life things. And I'm going to talk about why I chose this book in particular. Okay. Then I'm going to tell you what I liked about it. Okay. Now, bear in mind, I normally read post apocalyptic thrillers, fiction books, that sort of thing. So I'm kind of dipping my toe into a genre that I'm not very used to. But I am going to tell you what I liked about this book. Then I'm going to tell you what I didn't like about this book. And there were a few things that I did like and a few things I did not like. And finally, I'm going to give you an overall feeling and just a score on this book. So sit back, relax, grab yourself something to eat, grab yourself something to drink, and let's do a book review on the book Merc, American Soldiers of Fortune by Jay Mallen and Robert K. Brown. Now then, let's talk about some of the details of this book. It's called Merc, American Soldiers of Fortune. It's written by Jay Mallen and Robert K. Brown. It is 174 pages long, and it comes in paperback and Kindle. And just some other info is that there are pictures included in this book. Okay. So throughout the book, there are pictures that detail some of the things that they're talking about in the book. So now let's talk about the authors. And the first one we're going to talk about is Jay Mallen. Now, I've never heard of this man until this book. Okay, this is actually the first book I've read of his. Okay, and he wrote it with Robert K. Brown. Now, that name I do know. Okay, but it says here that Jay Mallen, and this is coming from his Amazon authors page, is a journalist scholar who's been reporting on and writing about Cuban affairs for over 50 years. He covered the revolution led by Fidel Castro in the late 50s and later reported from Nicaragua, Grenada, and Angola, where Castro were involved in those conflicts. In 56, he became a full-time stringer for Time and covered the entire Cuban Revolution from 56 to 58. He made 18 trips into the battle area and was first to report Russian troops and missiles in Cuba. So he was not just a normal journalist. He actually was more along the lines of a war correspondent, actually going into the battle area and reporting from the front lines. Okay. As it continues on and says he's completely bilingual and was raised in Cuba, but he was born in New York City. Malin studied journalism at Florida Southern College, receiving a bachelor's in 1949. He later took a position on the English language daily, the Havana Herald. After 2 years, he left the Herald to freelance articles, as well as become an assistant stringer for Time magazine. In the 1980s, he became a Latin correspondent for the Washington Times, followed by the position of news director at Radio Marti, which broadcast to Cuba from Washington. Now, mostly retired, he is living in the D.C. area. So, by all accounts, this man has done some things, okay? He was not just one of these writers who sat behind a desk and wrote. Okay, he was more along the lines of a war correspondent, going into the battlefield, talking about what was going on into the battlefield field of the Cuban Revolution, as well as many other conflicts in South America. So this man knows about the history of war in South America very, very fluent. So the second name that wrote this book is called Robert K. Brown. And this is a name that is very familiar to me. When I was a kid, right around 2000, okay, is when I started reading this magazine called Soldier of Fortune. All right. And I would buy it at the local grocery store. And every time I went to the grocery store, I would look for this magazine. Some months they would have it, some months they wouldn't. But right around like 2004, 2005 ish, I became a full time subscriber to Soldier of Fortune magazine. All right. At this time, I'm reading science fiction. I'm reading Tom Clancy. Maybe every now and then I'm reading a video game magazine. But the magazine that I loved the most at this time was Soldier of Fortune magazine. Okay. I love the articles. I love that these stories actually happen, where you're talking about the Rhodesia Scouts, executive outcomes, all of this stuff. I mean, each one of these stories honestly sounds like an action movie. Okay. Honestly sounds like stuff you would see in an action movie. And at that time, I did not even had even heard the term mercenary. To me, a mercenary was the bad guys in movies and TV shows. Okay. But after reading Soldier of Fortune magazine, that completely changed. Okay. And Robert K. Brown was the editor and publisher of Soldier of Fortune magazine. Okay. So I know this name very well. Okay. I know this name because of Soldier of Fortune magazine. But for those of you who maybe don't know this name, let's look at this man. So he was a lieutenant colonel, and he's an American correspondent, investigative journalist, and founder and former editor and publisher of Soldier of Fortune magazine. He was born in Monroe, Michigan, and he graduated from the University of Colorado on September 22nd, 1999. Mayor Oscar Goodman issued a proclamation declaring that day to be Soldier of Fortune Day and Lieutenant Colonel Robert K. Brown Day in honor of Soldier of Fortune magazine, its 20th annual convention in Las Vegas, and its founder and publisher. So, some of the things he's done throughout his life, his career. He served in the U.S. Army from 54 to 57, and again from 64 to 85. He was a Green Beret. He served with the Special Forces in Vietnam, retired from the U.S. Army as a lieutenant colonel. At one point, he was the vice chairman in the NRA. Around 1970, he founded a book publishing firm with Peter Lund named Paladin Press. This is a name I know very well. When I first started reading Soldier of Fortune magazine, the whole thing with Paladin Press was going on. So I know this name very well. Um, there's some controversy surrounding Paladin Press. But anyway, it said here that Brown began publishing Soldier of Fortune in 75. In April of 2022, Brown announced he has sold the Soldier of Fortune to journalist Susan Katz Keating, a frequent contributor to the magazine. A Chicago Tribune reporter doing a story on Brown's involvement in the Civil War in El Salvador in March of 84 witnessed Brown become the victim of an accidental shooting when one of Brown's friends pulled the trigger of a gun he thought was unloaded. The friend shot himself through the hand and the bullet struck Brown in the calf. And then it said that. I can't say that on here. No. And then it said editors of Soldier of Fortune instructed certain people and subjects ranging from weapons marksmanship to basic military skills such as water purification. They told the Washington Post in '83 that they accompanied certain people on at least 3 different combat patrols as observers, armed only with handguns for self-defense. Alexander McCall, one of the editors that took part in April and August, claimed that expenses were covered by the magazine. These Soldier of Fortune members briefed military personnel on the U.S. Embassy on how well Salvadorians fought in the field. And there's more here, but I'm not going to read it all. So I know this name very well. I loved Soldier of Fortune back in the day. they no longer publish a physical magazine now. They have a website and they still do stories about what's all going on around the world. And they it's more like an electronic magazine now than a physical one. I miss it very much. I wish it would come back in physical form. And it's nothing against digital. I just wish it would be a physical magazine again. But yeah, this name I know very well. You know, before I read Soldier of Fortune magazine, I only thought of mercenaries as the bad guys in TV and movies. You know, all the time when you watch a movie, action movie, whatever, the bad guys were always mercenaries. Okay. But after reading this, I found out that they weren't always the bad guys. Sometimes they were the good guys. And because of Soldier of Fortune magazine, I learned about Rhodesia. I learned about executive outcomes. I learned about the free companies of Europe. And it kind of made me want to learn more about these people. Okay. And when you read these stories literally, you literally could take any article from Soldier of Fortune magazine and make a successful movie out of it. Okay. That's what it seemed like to me. Like I was reading real life stories that almost seemed too good to be true. That I was reading real life stories that later were true. Okay. And every now and then they would do stories like they did a time where Sylvester Stallone went to Burma. You know, they talked to him. They talked to all these different people from survivalists to soldiers to everyone, getting their stories and find out what was going on with them. So yeah, I absolutely love Soldier of Fortune magazine back in the day. And I wish it would come back. I miss it very much. But yeah, Robert K. Brown was the editor and publisher of Soldier of Fortune magazine. He sold it a couple of years ago, and since then it's become like an e-magazine. And it's one of those magazines that I miss very, very much. So now let me talk about why I chose this book. See, this book is outside of what I normally read. Normally I read apocalyptic fiction like Invasion USA or the Patriot series with James Rawls, Invasion America, America Going Dark. So books where there is a big event, some type of huge event that causes the end of the world as we know it type of situation. Okay, and I love those books, but books like this and others in this genre of nonfiction that talk about mercenaries, I like reading also. Because people think mercenaries, the majority of people think mercenaries are just guys who go out and fight wars for money. That ain't true. Okay. Sometimes, and this book highlights this. Okay. Sometimes these men go out there and fight wars because, you know, they want money. True. But sometimes it's for a cause, or sometimes it's just for adventure, or maybe they're tired of all the red tape. You know, mercenaries throughout history have been vilified as the dogs of war. Okay. Because there's this perception that they just go from one war to another. This is so not true, especially in today's world. And I really like learning about these stories, learning about who these men are. Okay. Because rarely are these type of men talked about. Okay. Rarely are these type of men talked about, mentioned, anything. Okay. The last time these type of men were mentioned was in 2003 in Iraq when the whole Blackwater situation happened. Okay. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google Iraq and Blackwater and you'll find out. So, yes, these men, whether you're talking about mercenaries, private security contractors, private military contractors, they're all the same thing, basically, in my book. And maybe that's just me, but they're basically all the same thing. These men, their stories are rarely told, but they perform vital aspects of warfare. Okay. And sometimes when you are a country and you are out of options and you're being assailed by all sides, there was a time in American history where you would go to mercenaries. The first battle ever recorded was fought by mercenaries. Spartans would fight on opposing sides of a fight. Okay, the number one export that Sparta had was mercenaries. Okay, so mercenaries have been a vital part of warfare throughout human history. It's only during Napoleon that nationalized armies became the norm. Okay, heck, the most famous photo we have of America is Washington sailing across the Potomac. Okay, of him, on that boat as it's rolled across. All right. What many people don't realize was not only was he fighting the British, but he was also fighting Hessian mercenaries at that time. Okay, that whole attack, that Christmas Day attack, was not just against British soldiers, but German Hessian mercenaries. Okay, so mercenaries, even up to the American Revolution, were vital parts of the world. Okay, it's only more recently that certain rules have been put on them and they've had to become either private security contractors or private military contractors. But they're still in that same legacy of mercenaries, at least in my book. Okay. And I like learning about these men because rarely do their stories really get told. And I like learning about these stories. So, yeah, that's why I chose this book, because I want to learn some more about who these men were, and really why the world has vilified these men and women. No one really talks about, but there are women who do this job. Okay. So, yeah, like I really want to learn about these type of people and, you know, what they're up to today, how things have changed, what they were like in the past, some of their stories. And that's why I really loved Soldier of Fortune magazine. And that's why I really, do enjoy not only reading apocalyptic fiction books, but also books about mercenaries. Because I really do find the whole idea, the whole subject matter of mercenaries very interesting to learn about. So now let's focus on what I liked about this book. The first thing I liked about this book was the individual stories themselves. This book is made up of several individual stories concerning Americans who went off to become mercenaries. Okay. Some were running from something. Okay. Some had a bad background or were just running for something. Some were trying to prove something to themselves. Some were just doing it for the money. Some were doing it for the adventure, and some were flat out doing it for a cause. They didn't really care about money. They were just doing it for a cause. Okay, and I really do appreciate that. That they didn't just pick one type of person and say, okay, we're going to focus on this type of person who went out and became a mercenary. Okay, we're going to go across the spectrum and show that not every mercenary is the same. That some do it for the money, some do it for the adventure, and some do it because they're running away from something, and some are doing it because they believe in a certain cause. Okay, I really do appreciate that about these stories. I think that was a good idea and a good way of promoting this book to show that this book is not focused on one type of person, but many different people across many different conflicts and across the spectrum of society in America itself. And another thing this book did was it really did show that America, in some way, shape, or form, had their hand in several conflicts that really ain't talked about. Okay. Whether you're talking about Israel, where you're talking about men from America going over and joining the French Foreign Legion, whether you're talking about South America, this book does highlight a lot of conflicts that whereas the American government may not have their hand in it, Americans themselves, whether you're talking about, the Lafayette Escadrille during World War One, the Flying Tigers during World War Two, men who went over and joined the French Foreign Legion and whatnot, that in some way, shape, or form, Americans, maybe not the American government, but Americans had their hand in the majority of conflicts of the 20th century. And I do think that that really does showcase in this book, okay, that while the American government, the proper American government may not have their hand in many of these conflicts, there were Americans who were going overseas and fighting for one cause or for money or for whatnot in places that maybe people did not think they did that in, like Africa, South America. Like mentioned earlier, the Flying Tigers during World War II, Lafayette Escadrille during World War One. So many times, while the American government did not fight in these conflicts, Americans did. And I really do think this does showcase that in this book. And those were 2 points I really did like about this book. Now, let me mention one last thing I did like about this book, okay? And that was the pictures. Throughout the book, there are black and white and color photos of American mercenaries in different conflicts shown in this book. I really do think this was a good idea also. I think this is probably one of the better aspects of this book because it does give like faces to the people you're reading about. Okay. It does show that this ain't all just fluff, that there were real men doing these things. Okay. That these men had faces, that they had names, that they had mothers and fathers and all that. Okay. And it does give faces to the stories you're reading. So, yes, I really did enjoy the pictures. I really felt that they were a very good and needed addition to this book, and it's something you don't really see a whole lot, at least from my perspective, in these type of books. Okay, so yeah, I like the pictures. Okay, I thought the pictures were really done right. I thought they were great, and they came about in parts of the book that needed them. You know what I'm saying? It kind of gave your mind a break from reading because you're looking at these pictures. Okay. So yeah, I really did enjoy the pictures. It really gave a personality to these guys, what these guys look like, and really show how these guys operated. These guys who were going overseas fighting other people's wars for whatever reason they were fighting them for. So yeah, I really did enjoy the pictures in this book. And I think it was a good addition to this book. Now let's focus on what I did not like about this book. And the first one is a biggie of mine. It's a pet peeve of mine. Okay. And that is there was no glossary or explanation of terms. Now, look, I get it. This book is for a particular segment of the population, for a niche group of people in the population. I get that. Okay. But still, they should have had a glossary in case someone not from this part of society wished to read this book. Okay. Not everyone knows what a T-54 tank is, or what an RPG is, or what, this term means or that term means. And look, it had an index. I will admit that it had an index, but the index was really like, what's this doing here without a glossary? Okay. Or some type of explanation of terms. Okay. If they just had a couple of pages to explain maybe some of the more military terms of this book, I think it would probably open it up to a wider audience. Okay. And I think that is kind of a pet peeve of mine when books like this do not have an explanation of terms. And I get it. They're for a particular segment of the population. I really do understand that. But I still think they should have a glossary in case, someone's at the airport and sees this book and is kind of interested to read it. That way, if they see a term in there, they don't have to go to Google and Google it or go to Bing or whatever search engine they use to Google what this term means, what that term means, where this place was, where that place was. I mean, there were multiple times, and I've read post-apocalyptic fiction, I've read military fiction, where even I was, kind of getting lost in the terms sometimes. And I felt a glossary would have not broken up my flow so much to where if I read something I didn't understand it, I had to go to Google it. Okay. So like I really felt that not having some type of explanation of terms or a glossary, even a small one, I think is really a handicap to this book. Okay. I really do believe that. Second thing I didn't like was at times it felt like the book was disjointed. You would start with an explanation of American mercenaries. Then you do the French Foreign Legion. Then you do a guy who goes off somewhere else. Then you go back to people who do French Foreign Legion, and then you get another explanation of other American mercenaries. Okay. I felt that if they were going to do a book, they should focus first on America's history with mercenaries. Okay. Where you're talking about Davy Jones, the Flying Tigers, Lafayette, Escudel, whoever you're talking about, focus first on America's history of mercenaries. Then focus on the French Foreign Legion and their history. Because a lot of American mercenaries in this book got their start by joining the French Foreign Legion. Okay. Then focus on all the stories that have the French Foreign Legion in it. Then focus on all the stories that don't, of Americans who maybe went overseas and fought in other wars, not being a part of the French Foreign Legion or something like that. And then have like a proper ending, like an overall prediction of where America and Americans are going to go forward with mercenaries and PMCs or private military contractors and private security contractors and so forth. Okay. At times, the book felt disjointed, like they were jumping around from story to story, not really caring. Oh, well, this guy was in the French Foreign Legion and this guy and so forth. It just felt really disjointed sometimes. Okay. And I felt that that was also another handicap of this book that could have been rectified if they just kept everything like neat and tidy. Like start with like a history of mercenaries for America, then focus on those who got their start in the French Foreign Legion, then focus on maybe those who did not, and then focus on maybe some type of prediction of where America is going to go with terms of mercenaries and private military contractors and so forth, and then do a glossary, which they still did not add, and I'm still kind of peeved about. It's a pet peeve of mine. But look, like I said before, this book did feel disjointed at times, and I do think that that is a real handicap to this book overall, especially for someone who's not read these type of books before or who doesn't really read this type of area of books before. And I'm not just talking like military nonfiction books. I'm talking about military books in general, whether they're fiction, nonfiction, science fiction, whatever. You know, it really will seem like this book is very disjointed. And I do think that that is a real handicap for this book. So, in conclusion, let me say this. I think the fact that they did not have a glossary or a bibliography or an explanation of terms, and I think at times the chapters felt disjointed, really does let this book down. And I think that if they had just added a glossary, if they had just added some type of explanation of terms, it would have gotten a higher score. I did enjoy this book, okay? But if you've never read a military type of book before, you're going to get kind of lost in some of the terms, and you're going to have to be going to Google a lot to find out what this term means, what that term means, when they could just add a few extra pages and add some type of explanation of terms and made it more readily available to the public. The fact they didn't do that really does lower the score on this a little bit. I did enjoy the stories, okay? I thought that making the stories from a wide range of individuals, not just one type of person, but from a wide range of people, really does help connect with people. But I think the fact that there was no glossary included, that at times the story seemed disjointed, really does let this book down. And at the end of the day, I'm going to have to give it a 7 out of 10 stars. My suggestion is if you read any type of military book before, whether it be fiction or nonfiction, you're going to be okay with this book and you're going to enjoy it. If you haven't, there are going to be times where you're going to have to go to Google and look up some search terms. So I definitely would suggest this not being your first type of military book to read. Okay. I would definitely suggest something else if this is going to be your first military book. But I do believe that if you have read this type of book before, whether it be a military fiction or nonfiction book, you're going to do okay and you're going to enjoy it very much. And so I give it a 7 out of 10 stars. But I think that if they just added a glossary and maybe made the chapters not so disjointed or feel so disjointed, then it would have gotten a higher score and it would have been more readily available to the public. But the fact that they did have stories from people of different walks of life, that they did talk about conflicts that America was involved in, that they weren't officially involved in, but that Americans still fought in. And the fact that they did have pictures that did give faces to these people really does lift the score up a little bit. But I still can't get over the fact that there was no glossary, and I can't get over the fact that there are times where the chapters seem disjointed. Still, I had a good time reading this, but if this is your first type of military book to read, I would definitely suggest going elsewhere. But if you've read these type of books before, whether it be fiction or nonfiction, I definitely think this will be a good book for you to read over, waiting in line at the airport or something. Okay. So this is a quick book to read. I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed the stories. It's just no glossary, and at times it seemed disjointed. I can't get over that. So the final score for Merc, American Soldiers of Fortune, is 7 out of 10 stars. So that was my book review of Merc, American Soldiers of Fortune. It got 7 out of 10 stars. I hope you guys are doing good. I hope you guys are staying safe, staying well, staying healthy. My next book review will be book 2 of the Red Tide series by Chris Kennedy called Occupied Seattle. It is book 2 of the Red Tide series. I've already read book 1, and its review should be up over on YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble. So please check it out. And then in the coming weeks, I will be doing a book review of Occupied Seattle, the book 2 of the Red Tide series. There will also be other streams and videos I'll be doing as well as summer finally winds down and we start getting into fall more. So keep an eye open for those. I hope that you guys are doing well. I hope you guys are staying safe, staying healthy. I hope you guys had a great summer. Check out some of my other videos over on YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble. I will see y'all in the next video and in the next stream. Laters.